counselling, we need to eliminate that power dynamic. It's different in psychoanalysis, where people do expect you to know more than they do. But if you're going to be working in a person-centred way, then you need to release that power dynamic. So I dress the same as my clients. I work at my client's level. I respond to them at their level. And that's not being patronising or anything. It's saying, you are the expert about you. You are the one that knows the most about you. What I know about is helping you to release that information and empower you to work. In psychodynamic, I'm saying, I am the person who can solve your problem about this. But I'm not empowering you. The next time you have a problem, you're going to have to come back to me and I will analyse that problem and then I will help you build awareness about that. So they're two different approaches. And indeed, if you go into the medical approach, well, obviously that's not where I'm qualified and things, then yes, I am a clear expert. I know absolutely everything there is to know about these medicines I'm going to give to you. Therefore, you can feel safe and reassured, because I know you don't. You know, to you it's a little white tablet. You have no idea what that's going to do. Well, actually, I do. So feel safe. I'm a doctor. I'm not a doctor, but I'm paraphrasing that. So there's different roles for the power dynamic. And in person-centred counselling, I would argue, in my practice, that I don't wear a white coat. I know who my client is before they come in. So some of my clients will be young working class men, and they'll typically be dressed in jeans and a t-shirt, so I'll mirror their dressing. I don't dress like them because I'm not 22. I don't try and dress like them, but I do dress in a very casual way, so they look at me and say, okay, he's dressed casually, he's not wearing a suit and tie. A suit and tie is frightening, that means authority. You know, I'm not trying to put that across. However, I may be dealing, my next client might be a bank manager or a solicitor who will come in a suit and tie. So I have to level off the power dynamics, and very quickly I have to go and get changed, put on a suit and tie, and sort of respond at that level. And I'll even use different language. If I'm working with a young man from my locality, I can speak the local dialect. You know, we have a dialect. We have English and we have a dialect. And I will work much more in the dialect. Which brings me on to a point that was brought up just before we switched on the camera, which was working with people from different cultures. In India, well, I was going to say it's like Europe. It's lots of states. But it's actually more than that. It's lots of states with lots of different cultures. By and large in Europe, we have a European culture. Certainly in Western Europe, once we start reaching out to Turkey, to the southern Mediterranean states, but by and large they're very similar. We've intermingled, we've invaded each other on a regular basis, so we do understand sort of each other. It's not too alien to me that in the Mediterranean countries they start work early, they take a big siesta in the middle of the day, and then they work later into the evening. But you know what? They have a very much, we use it in Spain, they have a word, mañana. It simply means whenever. Mañana, mañana, you know, sort of. Will you come and fix my tap for me, Mr. Plumber? Mañana. When I'm ready, I will. Yeah, I'll do it, but whenever. In Northern Europe, we have what we call the work ethic, the Protestant work ethic that says, you do this now. And you have set times and you do everything. It's maybe where my idea of boundaries come in, that I'm working mainly within that Northern European client group. So we work with times and we're very boundary and things. So that's an interesting reflection on that. But working with different cultures, the best advice I know for working with different cultures, and within Britain itself there are many cultures, and it is to take time to understand the culture. So first of all, you say, if I'm working with someone from South Asia, I will say, I know very little about your culture. I respect your culture, but I actually I'm ignorant of it. I know very little. So tell me, as we're working about your culture, acknowledge that our cultures are different. So we don't pretend that we are the same culturally. I will use phrases like, in my culture, we would see this in such and such a way. However, I understand that in your culture, you may well see it differently. Please tell me how you see it. And people are very keen to tell you about their culture because you're showing an interest in it. And you're starting to build the basis of your therapeutic alliance. It will take longer because you're beginning to understand each other's cultures as how you do that. With the, obviously we don't move totally into cultural exchange. We are still working with the things they're bringing. So you might be working with that, with anxiety or depression. So essentially you're asking them, how is depression understood in your culture? How does it manifest? How does your culture respond to depression? Are depressed people pushed away? Are depressed people helped? Are they welcomed into the community? And you're learning about not only their condition and about how it's affecting them, you're learning about their culture. And you're always kind of saying to the client, without actually saying it, I'm from a different culture, but I still want to lean across those cultural boundaries and understand you. There is great commonality between human beings, however our cultures are different. So you're reinforcing that. So working with other cultures is acknowledging that your culture is different. I guess things to watch, however, might be that over. Things to watch, however, might be things like if I'm working with near where I live, there is a large Hasidic Jewish community, and they will, some of the more outward members will come to me for counselling. And indeed, I have counselled rabbis who've come outside of their own community because of their position in their community. They're at a disadvantage. They have a great deal of respect in their community, but where do they go when they've got a problem? Who do they go and talk to unload? They could go to other rabbis, but that might cause a problem within the rabbinic system, that, oh, so-and-so's got this problem. Maybe it's gambling, or maybe it's drinking. Perhaps not drinking, but maybe gambling, and that sort of thing that they need to talk about. Maybe drinking, and that would be very difficult for them to talk about, that they kind of go against the cultural thing. So they come outside of their culture, and that's happened for me. Now it's very important, yes, I talk about my culture and your culture, but I also have to include them. They are still English. They are still part of my nationality. So I do have to be careful that I don't sort of say, you and I, in a nationalistic sense, as though I'm sort of saying you're a foreigner. No, your culture has lived within my culture for many generations. You are British and things, but also you have differences as well. So it's acknowledging the differences, but it's also at the same time saying we have very much in common, that there are commonalities. We share our nationality, but we can within that have a different culture. So again, it's always about acknowledging, and it's always about awareness. And in counselling, the key is always to feed back to the client, I am hearing your difference. I am aware. I'm hearing what you're telling me. I am aware. And you do that verbally. So if you come to me and you tell me that you're from Tamil Nadu and that, I think it's going to be really difficult working with a white counsellor because I don't think you'll understand what we do there, then I will feedback. I hear that you're saying that you don't, you feel that I won't understand. So what I suggest is I'm open for you to tell me. And I will tell you how that works with my culture as well. And we will build up an understanding. So, okay, so it's not perfect. I don't intuitively know everything about you, but I am very prepared to learn about you and be open-minded. And share with you my experience so you can share yours. That's how I work with different cultures. Is that helpful?
Yeah.
It's really kind of very self-evident. The bit that's less self-evident is tell people. Work out in your own mind, how are you going to let people know that I am open to your culture?
Yeah. One of the good things about CBT is a lot of things that you're talking about, it already includes that. For example, one of the basic rules is that when you're in a counseling session and whether the client is from a different culture or not, you feed back to the client and say, this is what I'm hearing,
Yes.
I'm listening. Is that what you're trying to tell me?
That is exactly, that's the tenet of person-centred.
Yes.
Person-centred counselling is always feeding back, not necessarily using their exact language, but paraphrasing. So, so I'm going to paraphrase. I now understand that what you're saying is that you would like me to echo back with the words, with my words, what you have told me.
Yeah.
So I've told you exactly the sense of what you're saying, but I've demonstrated, I processed it, because I'm using different words. I'm not just repeating what you're saying, I'm actually taking it, reformulating it, and giving it back to you. And you're saying, yes, I now understand that you've got that. So, very important to do that. And, so you're demonstrating your awareness. I love CBT. I think CBT, when working with addiction, is, in my own mind, I view it as the first aid. That my client comes to me, the very first thing we've done is let's talk about alcohol. We've taken the alcohol out of the system using benzodiazepines. And while they're on the benzodiazepines, by default you're treating their anxiety. Virtually all alcoholics have anxiety, or they have fear-driven depressions. But, it's back to that one foot in yesterday, one foot in tomorrow, all you end up doing is peeing on today that we talked about yesterday. So, the benzos have done that, but then of course they stop taking the benzodiazepines, and then the anxiety starts to re-emerge. So we can start using third wave CBT in terms of mindfulness and things as a first aid way of treating that anxiety. Once we've done that, we can then start working in a much more psychodynamic way, which within the 12 steps we will be talking about doing step 4 and step 5, which is a psychodynamic process that we are leading the client. Here we're in the expert role, we're leading the client, we're using person-centered techniques, but we're leading the client as us being the expert because they're scared of doing it. Very fearful to look at yourself in that kind of honesty. I think that's a very scary thing. So at that point you need to be a reassuring figure. You need to be a slight authority figure in that I am the expert in this, you can trust me, start telling me about yourself. So you can sort of intermingle person-centered work with psychodynamic work. On the one hand I'm saying, I'll feed back to you, you'll say something like, I'm a terrible womanizer. I've had 10 women sort of within 6 months and things, so I might feed back that, oh yes, I understand that, because when I was in my addiction, so we're working differently to a counselling way. In my addiction I found that when I wasn't using drugs and things, that I was very sexually driven and things, so you're sharing a little bit about yourself, which is the person-centered bit, but at the same time you can also possibly say the reason for that is, and we'll talk about dopamine systems and things, so you're switching in and out between working at a person-centered equal level to imparting information, and the whole idea is that you're creating a safe environment to allow the client to be very honest with you and tell you what's going on. The dangers of that is if you work solely in a psychodynamic way, they may say, okay, I'm going to tell you some things, but not others, because you're not one of us. You're slightly different. Psychodynamic always puts a bit of a border in there, a bit of a blockage, so you keep swapping in and out of it. That is something you might not do in pure counselling, but remember we're working with a slightly different client group, we're working in a slightly different way, we have that 12-step ethos that we're using, so we, you know, to work that, then we switch between those roles. And the skill then is to judge when am I at this level, when am I the psychoanalyst, and when am I the person-centered person who's swapping my experience with you and things. So that's kind of a trick there. Okay, we've looked at that. I want to talk about, which I was going to talk about earlier, I kind of got diverted in my own head, my spirit and spirituality. And really it's a scientific understanding or a scientific explanation of spirituality. Because I know it was mentioned yesterday, how do you work with atheists? For me, working with atheists is a major, but is a big part of what I do. To be fair, most of my clients may be secular, but they would possibly, if they understood the terms, describe themselves as agnostic. They're not sure if something's there or something isn't. I do also work with atheists as well. If I had to categorize myself, I would describe myself as an atheist. I will share with you at this point a little point very early in my recovery when I went to a 12-step meeting that was about, it was a step meeting, it was about learning about the steps, and they were talking about prayer, and this man introduced himself very early in my recovery, and this man introduced himself as an atheist, so I identified with that, and he said, and I pray. And he went on to talk about that. I didn't really get what he was talking about very early in my recovery, but I got enough to go to him afterwards and say, come on, you're an atheist, why do you pray? And he said, because it works. I thought, wow, yes, it works. The whole point is I'm here to get better. I'm not here to research the problem. I'm here to get better, so I'll do what he suggested. Well, it took me a little while, to be honest. I had to go through a lot of emotional pain before I entrusted myself to this process of prayer, and it worked. So there I have a conundrum, a problem for myself, a conundrum. I'm an atheist, and yet I pray, and prayer works. So how can I make that strange shape of things into a nice circle? How can I do that? First of all, I ask myself, why would religion, spirituality, belief be important to human beings? And not always, when I look at these things, I go back to the hunter-gatherer. The hunter-gatherer is the longest period that we can relate to of human beings at the level of evolution. You know, we've been hunter-gatherers maybe for 50,000 years, and then from the last 5,000 years we've moved into this changing environment. But I think we're still hunter-gatherers. I think we're still hunter-gatherers living in a very sophisticated world. But 50,000 years of evolution as being a hunter-gatherer, and if it's decided by evolution, that's wrong about use of words, but if evolution has brought forward strategies that involve spirituality, that involve religion, that involve belief, then there's probably a very important reason for them. Clearly, they imbue us with an ability to pass on our genes to the next generation. They give us a survival edge over people who don't use those systems. So there's a clear evolutionary reason for having those. So I looked at belief, and I kind of imagined, why would I want to believe? So here I am, I'm the hunter-gatherer, I'm on the Serengeti, the sun is beating down and everything's fine. Sun gets higher in the sky, that's fine. I'm lovely, I'm warm, I understand that the sun, I can see how the sun powers everything around me. But whoa, what happens? The sun starts to fall in the sky. And it starts to fall and fall and fall until it disappears. If I had no belief and very little knowledge, where's the sun gone? Will it come back? What happens if it won't come back? I have a brain that has cognitive abilities that's able to ask those questions. What happens if the sun just goes away and never comes back? That's the end of my world. It won't work anymore. That is really scary. So what do? I invest in belief. I invest in an idea of how the world that I understand has come into being. And perhaps I start saying to myself, there's another being in all of this who's going to make sure everything's all right. This other being makes sure the sun rides across the sky. In some beliefs, the sun rises across the sky, runs across the sky in a chariot. I think that's Greco-Roman ideas, I think. But what a lovely way of knowing that it comes across the sky, it rides across in a chariot, has a sleep, and then rides back and somehow gets to the other side. I don't quite know how they squared that circle. But it will be there. Perhaps I start firing up a little idea of, if I have a little ceremony, almost like OCD, obsessive compulsional behaviours. Perhaps when the sun goes down, if I fire a lighted arrow at it. An ancient British belief, very ancient British belief. I can't remember if they fired it in the morning or in the evening. But they fired an arrow to reignite the sun, to encourage the sun to come back. They believed as long as they did that every day, the sun would come round again. So I'm using belief to allow me to exist in a world that is full of uncertainties that my cognitive mind can make me aware of. Evolution gave me a cognitive mind, so I evolved strategies of a belief so I could answer the questions that I didn't know the answers to. So many religions in the world, you can live by religion. You don't need to know science. You can live a religious life and it will give you the answers that you need to live. Now, scientists might say they're the wrong answers. It doesn't matter. The fact is that you can live by them. And belief enables you to live by something where you don't know for certain what it is. Throughout the ages, we've had this, a great belief has been essential. Perhaps in the 21st century, perhaps in the modern world, we can start asking, do we need these beliefs anymore? Surely we can explain most things. There's still things we can't explain. And I have an absolute belief. Some people say to me, you're an atheist, so how can you have a spiritual awakening? That question was asked of me yesterday. I didn't try and answer it because it's a very complex question, but I feel I can answer it here. That I believe I am the person. I believe that I aspire to be the person that I'd like to be, the perfect me. I aspire to be my inner self. In person-centered counselling, we talk about having an inner self. Rogers talked about the notion of a flower that intuitively grows towards the sunlight, that knows which way to go. Which brings me on to Maslow. Maslow says, a painter must paint, a musician must make music, a human being must be the best human being they can be. Rogers talks about the flower within that must grow towards the sunlight as long as there's no blockages there. For me personally, I aspire to be that flower. I aspire to be that artist. That is my spiritual dimension. This is where my belief comes in. It's for me. I'm not saying it should be for anyone else. I don't put that on anyone else. But for internally, for me within, that's what I believe in. This is where, as an atheist, I can have belief. In other words, just like ancient man, I have a model of a world that I don't fully understand, but it makes sense to me. It's my points of reference. How do I live in my world? That is what spirituality is. And evolution has said that aspects of that spirituality can be described as being honest, can be described as being open-minded, can be described as being willing, can be described as being humble, can be described as being tolerant, In other words, being the person, treating other people as I would like to treat them. That is the person I want to be. That is my frame of reference. So, for me as an atheist, I don't carry a Bible or a Quran or any other religious book and things. I carry the spiritual principles that I heard originally in NN. And that allows me to be a spiritual person. That's not to say you can't take the principle, and I think actually you'll find certainly those original principles that fired up AA were drawn from a program that was drawn up by the Oxford group, which was all about initially how to be a better Christian, be spiritual, because it's, you know, being a Christian, being a Hindu, being a Muslim is not all about following the scripture. It's understanding the dynamic that you have to be honest in life, that you have to treat other people like you'd like to be treated yourself.